Warren, talk us through how big this economic impact will be from the shutdowns we're currently seeing in our two biggest cities.
Yeah, good afternoon, Kieran. It's hard to be precise because we're really in unknown territory here, but some Treasury numbers suggest $1 billion a week, as the story referred to. The existing restrictions were probably worth somewhere between half and $1 billion a week already. So we're getting up to a weekly cost of $1.5 to $2 billion, which in Greater Sydney, the weekly economic output's about $10 billion. So we're talking a 15 to 20% hit to economic activity from this high level of restrictions that were announced on the weekend, which is as severe as anything we've seen throughout this pandemic in this country.
Now, when you look at the rollout, 1 million Pfizer vaccines now arriving, this is really ramping up. Is that encouraging in terms of the health story, which basically underpins everything else, Warren?
Yeah, well, Brad Hazard sort of said it, that they're managing the situation, and it's an extremely costly situation to manage in terms of lost income and lost economic activity under these harsh restrictions. So getting that vaccination rate up to an acceptable level where we can live with the virus is absolute the priority for not just New South Wales but the whole of Australia. The Doherty Institute has been charged with coming up with a number of what that is. I mean, I think the numbers has to be around 80% of the adult population. Australia-wide, we have an adult population of about 21 million. So to get 80% of them vaccinated twice is 33 million doses. And we've hit 10 million yesterday. And if we've got 1 million Pfizer a week, some AstraZeneca, we can get there in September, October. I mean, I think one of the big opportunities here is actually to try and reduce the hesitancy to AstraZeneca. And if we can get over 1.5 million and up to 2 million jabs a week, then we can get the country up to that 80% level in a reasonable amount of time, sort of by late September.
Yeah, well, that'd be huge as we head into the spring and summer. If you can get that reopening or confidence that you've got enough of the community vaccinated, what do you think about the prospects of another bounce post-lockdown? We've seen one remarkable V-shaped recovery. Will we see another?
Well, I think we will, and that is absolutely the key to this situation. And the New South Wales Premier is taking a big risk with these harsher lockdowns because we know that we get the bounce. The government support keeps individuals and businesses in the game, so to speak, and then once restrictions are eased, we know that we can come out quickly. We've seen it all across the country, Victoria, after their second wave last year. So the risk of an extended lockdown is you start to see business failure and you start to see job losses. And that, of course, jeopardises the bounce. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but that is what the federal government will be monitoring, and that'll be whether or not the question about whether more government support is needed. I believe the real risk is in the small business community, and I think the concern there is not so much that banks foreclose, because I think banks are going to take a pretty good approach to this. It's whether or not people give up, because not just are we operating with these restrictions and unable to operate, but we actually are operating once the restrictions ease in a very difficult environment. We've got labour shortages, supply shortages. It is very difficult for small business, full stop, whether you got restrictions or not. So I think you've got to monitor small businesses. At the moment, I think the assessment has to be that we bounce. But the longer the restrictions remain in place, the more chance we have of losing businesses and jobs permanently.
And finally, Warren, so much, as we've alluded to earlier, it comes down to what that modelling from the Doherty Institute says is the benchmark to then reopen. What numbers do we have to get to in vaccinations to reopen and get back to some normality, so to speak?
Yeah, well, that's the most important number in Australia right now, quite frankly. And they need to get on with and get that number out there. And it's extremely complex. I'm sure their modelling takes into a lot. We need a national number. I would have thought we need state-level numbers. In New South Wales, we may not be able to get rid of this Delta variant, in which case, that number is critical to the government strategy. So we really need to know it. I think it's around 80%. I don't think it can be above that. We've got, anti-vaxxers, we've got hesitancy, we've got practicalities that mean getting above that's too hard. I don't think it can be much below it. So I think that's the number. There is this issue about children and boosters. But the Doherty Institute and the federal government needs to get that number out very, very quickly so we can all work towards that common goal.